22, 2010, a Florida man purchased 2 pizzas for 10,000 bitcoins. The value of a single bitcoin back then was just a few pennies. The total value of these bitcoins was about $30. 13 years later, the total value of them is about $311 million. So in this video, we're going to talk about intriguing, fascinating Bitcoin stories of the past and try to decide whether it makes sense to be buying Bitcoin today in order to achieve similar results to the Golden Pizza Boy. Satoshi Nakamoto is the person who is rumored to have been the first one to have ever mined Bitcoin. We don't really know his true identity, but there has been a lot of speculation around that. Even Elon Musk has been rumored to be the real person behind Satoshi Nakamoto. The Bitcoin supply of coins is not variable. It is capped at 21 million Bitcoins, and so far we have mined about 19 million of these coins. Satoshi Nakamoto is rumored to own about 5% of that supply, which is about 1 million Bitcoins, and it is worth about $31 billion today. We expect Bitcoin to be fully mined near year 2140, and if Elon Musk hasn't planned already for a way to actually stay alive till then, I don't think we're gonna be witnessing that. More than 20% of the total supply of Bitcoin has been lost forever. This is about 4 million Bitcoins. And some people have actually lost access to these Bitcoins. This is actually great news for people who already own some Bitcoin because the value of their ownership is actually going up because of the less supply available in the current market. But where are the 20% of Bitcoin that has been lost? There have been many cases of people who have actually lost access to their Bitcoin. One such case is Stefan Thomas. It is a person who owned a disk full of Bitcoin, about 7,000 of them, and he has forgotten his own password. He has stored his digital wallet in a disk, and he has to remember his password in order to recover all the Bitcoins. His digital disk allows him for 10 attempts, and he has already tried 8 of them, leaving him with 2 more tries to go. The problem is he can still not remember his password. In his case, he owns 7,000 Bitcoin, and that is actually about $200 million today that he still doesn't have access to. Back in 2010, the value of Bitcoin was less than 10 cents. So how has it become that big? Is it an actual scam or it does have actual value in the real economy? In this video, we're going to be examining that. But we should be wondering whether it makes sense for Bitcoin to reach $1 million, as it has been speculated by people in the past. It has already reached $50,000, and it's going there again potentially. Bitcoin is an alternative to fiat currency that we are using today, which would be the dollar. A fiat currency is backed by a government, and it doesn't really use any commodities such as gold. It is not backed by a commodity, and it is also negligible in terms of its cost. Printing the actual dollar has negligible cost to the government and the people. Since fiat money is backed by a government, its value is based in the trust that people have in a credit system. On the other hand, Bitcoin is a digital currency that is not backed by any governments. And there is nobody actually around to validate whether a transaction is fair and lawful. There is no bank, there is no proxy. The security of transactions is based in a technology which is called the blockchain. And it is basically based on some cryptographic algorithms. In a typical transaction, a fiat currency transaction with a dollar, for example, if Jane wants to send $10 to Joe, she will have to go through a bank. The bank will be the proxy that will be verifying both parties, making sure that the whole action is legal and lawful, and there is no fraud behind it. In case of a fraud, the bank would be able to reverse the transaction. A Bitcoin transaction is very different to a banking transaction. In the case of Jane and Joe, if Jane wanted to send money to Joe, both of these parties are now anonymous. They are basically digital wallets. They just have some IDs that are completely anonymous and nobody knows about them. The whole transaction is based on the blockchain system and it is verified by it. There is no other entity that will be making sure that this transaction is lawful and legal. So you may be asking, if that's the case, couldn't Joe or Jane actually attempt fraud and try to steal money from each other? That is not easy with a Bitcoin or any other crypto system that is using a blockchain because of the underlying cryptographic systems. Because the whole blockchain is available to everybody, it's basically public and it's publicized, people would have full access to that. And again, using cryptographic algorithms, they can make sure that nothing has been forged. While this sounds fantastic and a great way to get rid of banks, not so fast. There are legitimate reasons for using a fiat currency and proxies like a bank. For example, a bank can make sure that both parties are trusted. While when we're using Bitcoin, both parties are anonymous. And for instance, we could be having cases of tax evasion or money laundering. So the banking is there to actually play the role of a safety mechanism indeed. On the other hand, Bitcoin is a decentralized system and it allows people to do their own transactions without any other parties getting in between. The problem is that many governments do not really like that. For example, China has banned crypto mining and transactions back in 2021. And it's scary that although a lot of people are actually against it in China, the government can actually at any point completely ban all crypto. And it could happen for the US as well, or any other country in the world. You may think that the US government will never ban any cryptocurrencies, but think again. Charlie Munger, for example, who is a very well-known investor in the world, pretty much a worldwide known investor, has urged for the US to actually ban all crypto. In fact, the Biden administration has been accused of attempting a crypto shutdown under an operation called Choke Point 2.0. Barney Frank, a US representative, has let us know that the US attempted to make an example of the signature bank in an attempt to actually ban crypto in the US. He quotes that this was an attempt to tell people that the government doesn't want people dealing with crypto. So the big problem with cryptocurrencies is governance. The decentralization motive sounds very noble too, but once a government thinks that they are about to lose control, they will be doing something about it. Now the government may attempt to adopt, or even better create, a cryptocurrency system that will be the alternative and the actual official alternative to all the other crypto systems. This has actually been already researched and it has been instructed by Biden himself. President Biden has already instructed for research on that field, attempting to research things about a CBDC, a central bank digital currency system. The adoption of such a system could actually decimate any other cryptocurrencies in an attempt to make the CBDC system the one that is going to be used throughout the US, potentially even the world. So now you may be wondering, okay, if the US government decides to adopt a CBDC system, I still own my Bitcoin, and Bitcoin today is about $30,000 and it could potentially keep rising, right? So I'm not going to be losing money. Well, not so fast. Let's talk a little bit about value in this video, in order to help you understand what the value of Bitcoin could be in such a case. Let's take this example of these two cozy homes. They are exactly the same, right? Exactly the same. They have the same fridge, the same oven, the same material, made of the same material. The difference is that one is actually built in Minneapolis, let's just say, and these numbers are all figurative, by the way. So let's just say one is in Minneapolis, worth about $400,000, and the other one is in San Francisco, worth about $1 million. It actually may be cheap. So what is the difference? Why the price disparity there? So the disparity comes from the fact that the buyer in San Francisco was actually willing to pay $1 million to purchase that home. And there is a real reason behind that. And you could say that this is demand and supply, and that would be right, indeed. The buyer actually wanted this home and they were willing to pay $1 million. But there is a reason for this. In example, the Minneapolis home could potentially rent for about, let's just say, $400. It probably would be more, but again, this is an example. So let's just say it's renting for $400. The San Francisco home, again, the exact same home, can rent for $1,000. So as you can understand, there is a disparity there on the amount of cash flow that these two properties can generate. And this is very important because the overall economy in San Francisco is more expensive and there is higher appeal than Minneapolis for most people, at least so far at the moment as I'm making this video. The thing is, all these homes in San Francisco are going to be worth when compared to the average home in Minneapolis, and they will be generating more income for potential buyers. This means that these homes will also get to appreciate more in the future as well. So overall, they are more desirable and more valuable assets to own, and people are willing to pay more for them, even though they are the exact same thing. So now let's take it to the stock market. We examined the real estate market, let's take a little bit of a look at what happens with a stock. Let's take the example of Microsoft stock, for instance, the value that it closed as yesterday. That was $359, about $359.49, I think was the exact value. So what is happening there? That price, the $359 about for Microsoft, is the price of the actual last purchase that was made in the stock market just before the stock market closed. So what happened there is that in the very last second, the very last order before the market closed, the seller and the buyer agreed to do this exchange for $359.49. So let's take a look at this diagram and see what exactly happened 3 seconds before the market closed. 3 seconds before close exactly, let's just say there was one seller and 2 buyers available right then. There are actually way more, but this is just to illustrate here. So one seller was willing to sell a stock, that's a single share pretty much of Microsoft, for $362. And remember, a seller always wants to make money, right? As much as possible. Now a buyer wants to be buying the stock for as little as possible. So buyer A was willing to actually pay $358 for the stock, and buyer B was willing to pay $359 for the stock. So there was no agreement. The parties never agreed there. But a second later, the seller actually was willing to take a little bit less. So the seller was actually willing to sell for $361 now. The buyers kinda wanted the stock as well, and so they were willing to pay a little bit more this time. So for instance, $359.5 and $360. But again, they were a little bit off. They still haven't agreed to a price. And just a second before the stock market closed, the very last transaction, the seller was like, okay, I'm willing to sell for $360 now. And the buyer B in this case, was like, okay, I'll take that. And they agreed to do this transaction. So this is what happens in the stock market overall. This is how the stock market works. It's an auction, basically. And in the case of Microsoft, for instance, and any other stock, the price that you are seeing today is basically the price of the very last transaction. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe if you're new around here. That helps a ton, and thank you. So if a single share, if the stock price of Microsoft is $359.49 today, what is the whole of Microsoft worth? How do we get to that? In order to get that value, we examine something which is called the market cap or market capitalization. And this is actually very simple. It's the amount of outstanding shares that exist out there. These are basically the shares that you and I can actually go out there and buy. The ones that can be traded, basically. So we get this amount and we multiply it by the price of a single share. Again, the $359.49. I'm being very exact there. And so if we do that, we will see that the amount of outstanding shares for Microsoft today is about 7.44 billion. That's the amount of shares, right? And in order to discover the market capitalization or the total worth of the company, the only thing we need to do there is basically multiply this amount of shares with the price of the stock today. And we are going to be seeing that Microsoft is worth about $2.67 trillion today. Now, there are many ways to decide whether it makes sense to be buying a single share of Microsoft based on what we have seen so far. We can examine how expensive it is, how much money they are making, if they have a lot of debt, and then we want to compare that with how much money we would potentially be making on other investments. Would we be making more money if we actually invested in, let's just say, bonds, or if we actually bought a home and rented that home? Would it be more money compared to buying Microsoft share, for instance? This is exactly how we go about evaluating investments. So Bitcoin is a little bit different. It doesn't really provide any cash back to us. For example, if you're buying a stock, you could be getting some dividend back, or the price of the stock could be appreciated because the company is making more money. The same thing with a home. You may be getting extra rent because the overall economy becomes better. It gets more expensive to rent in the specific area that you are renting to. And so your investment actually grows in value. But with Bitcoin actually is not really firmly adopted in the economy, and it doesn't really produce anything, right? If you think about it, it's the same thing as gold. When you buy gold, it doesn't really produce anything extra for you. It's basically there, sitting somewhere out there and looking at you. It doesn't produce new cash is the thing. It doesn't produce new value to the economy. That's key. However, Bitcoin also has a market cap. It also has a value for its total. Remember, we told you earlier that the Bitcoin total supply is 21 million Bitcoins. Now, this is not the exact amount because we haven't really mined all of Bitcoin yet. But how do we mine all that? The total amount of the market capitalization, the market cap of Bitcoin, would be about $627 billion. The problem with Bitcoin, again, as I mentioned earlier, is that it doesn't really provide any new value. It doesn't create something new for the economy. And so the thing is, in order for it to remain relevant, it has to be widely adopted by people. It has to be used as a currency and it has to be sought for. People need to want to own Bitcoin for a reason, not just because it's fancy and people will potentially want to be making money out of the next person who is willing to pay more for it for no real reason. So there's nothing really valuable behind Bitcoin other than the promise that someday it will potentially be adopted by everybody. And we have to stay vigilant about that fact. It is much more likely that Bitcoin could end up being the tulip of this century. Back in 1600s in Holland, people were willing to buy tulips at any price. You could actually buy a mansion for a tulip, and that is not a joke. There was a bubble back then that eventually burst because the tulips, although they look nice, they don't produce anything. They don't produce extra cash, they don't produce anything for the person who owns them. And eventually people understood that they don't really have the value that people were actually willing to spend for them. It all came down to market sentiment because people were buying it and the price was rising, more people kept buying it and the price kept rising. And the same thing happens with a lot of assets. Remember, for example, other crypto systems like Dogecoin, another case where the price of the Dogecoin was actually inflated for no real reason. It's basically the exact same thing as any other cryptocurrency. Remember the case of NFTs? People have already forgotten about those, right? A lot of celebrities even bought these for tons of money. Justin Bieber, for instance, bought a Bored Ape NFT and he paid $1.3 million for it. Today, the price of the same NFT is less than $60,000. What a loss, right? The big problem is that the NFT that he bought is basically a digital drawing. And people could say a lot of things about the fact that he actually owns the only one, and even though it's a non-fungible asset, he's the only owner there and he owns something valuable. That's not really the case because this NFT is basically a drawing that doesn't produce any economic output and basically doesn't bring back any dough to Justin Bieber. And it's gonna be tough to send to somebody else. He will have to rely on his influence in order to sell that. And as the whole NFT craze dies down, it's going to be harder and harder to get rid of those assets, if they are assets in the first place. At the height of the crypto craze, new crypto systems were basically created every minute, almost every minute. Right now, as I'm making this video, even though the whole craze has almost died down, or at least kinda died down, the last crypto system, and again, it's a new crypto system, it's a new crypto coin that you can go buy right now, was created less than 10 hours ago. Imagine that, right? And what's even worse, there is even more crypto coins following that creation right now, if you take a look at it online. The problem is that all of these crypto coins and crypto systems possess zero intrinsic value, and they are basically waiting for the next person who is willing to set their own money for no real reason to actually find their new owners. What is your opinion about Bitcoin and crypto? Do you think Bitcoin is potentially going to be the CBDC of the future? Do you think it's going to be widely adopted? Do you even think that the government could potentially use Bitcoin for our daily transactions? Let me know with a comment below, and thank you for watching this video. Bye bye.